Welcome to The Standard. From Vancouver, I'm Peter Klein. Tonight, an exclusive interview with Iraq's ambassador to the United Nations, who speaks candidly about resisting U.S. influence in his country. But first, a remarkable discussion with a husband and wife who say his affair, surprisingly, saved their marriage. Anne Bercht says she was living her dream life. She had a successful, good-looking husband, wonderful kids, and a sense of security she thought was impenetrable. That was until her husband walked in one day and announced he was having an affair. The news sent shockwaves through every single facet of their life, a journey she's chronicled in her provocatively titled book, My Husband's Affair Became the Best Thing That Ever Happened to Me. Anne and her husband have been on Oprah, Dr. Phil, and travel North America trying to help other couples going through the rocky challenge of infidelity. Anne Bercht joins me now. Welcome, Anne.
Hi, Peter. Nice to be here.
If you would, maybe tell us about that moment when you first heard your husband was having an affair. How did he tell you, and what was your reaction?
He said he had something to talk to me about, and so I was actually a little bit excited at first, thought maybe we were going to have this nice heart-to-heart chat, and made a couple of cups of coffee and sat down, and no words. He didn't speak. I thought, well, he initiated this conversation. I kept waiting. No words. And the longer that silence got, the more the fear just started to creep all over me. What does my husband have to share with me that is so bad that he can't say it?
Did you anticipate this might be it, or did you think it was a medical issue? I mean, what was going through your mind during that silence?
I didn't have a finger on what it could have been. Like I said, when I first started, I thought it would have been a good thing. And ironically, that very night before he had initiated the conversation, I was coming back from, I'd been taking voice lessons, and I was singing in my car, and I had that Toni Braxton song on, Unbreak My Heart, and I'm singing alone in the car, and I'm thinking, boy, what a great song, but those words are depressing. But good thing that could never happen to me, because we have such a good marriage. And here, this is the very night that my husband's telling me that there's somebody else.
So when you found out, after he told you, was it sort of shock? Was it anger? Did you want revenge? How did you react?
Shock.
Yeah.
Absolute devastation. One person that I worked with described the feeling of when her husband told her as if he had taken a dagger and thrown it across the room and pinned her up like this with the knife in her heart, and she's stuck to the wall. That's about what it feels like. And nothing ever prepares you for that moment. I asked a couple of basic questions. Did I know her? Was she married? And then I just basically sat there all night, never slept, didn't move from my chair, just in shock.
And did you go and call your friends, or were you embarrassed about this? Did you share this with your friends?
In the morning, after I took my kids to school, the first thing I did was shared it with my closest friend. And she was absolutely devastated as well. If you could imagine two women sitting 45 minutes without saying a word after I told her. And but in the beginning, while we healed, which took us 2.5 years, we shared with maybe about 10 people, just a small circle of people to support us through the devastation and the crisis. Other than that, we definitely kept it private and to ourselves.
Now, initially, your husband was going to move out, or he did move out?
Moved out for 2 weeks, and it was crazy. It was chaos. Our once role model family just comes apart.
And you had 3 kids, right?
3 kids.
I mean, when did you tell them?
He told them, and they were 12, 14, and 16. And the first daughter, he told me on a Monday night. By Friday, he had told the first daughter, and then the other, it was a week or so later. And basically, we had a conversation on that Friday night. You know, I said, well, you'll just have to never see her again. Another long silence. I began to realize he didn't even know who he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. This is after 18 years in a good marriage. You're supposed to be having arguments. You're supposed to be having problems. There's supposed to be something wrong. And so we were having an argument, her, me, make up your mind, and I was not being calm about it. And he shouted back at me, her then, packed his duffel bag and left. And I heard, I'm leaving you and marrying her, but really what was going on was he couldn't stand the pressure I was putting on him. He couldn't stand the pressure the other woman was putting on him, and he just wanted to get away from both of us to get some space and think about what to do.
Now, you didn't know this other woman, did you?
No.
Did you meet her? You wanted to meet her?
I did. I did have an encounter with her.
That's sort of untraditional, right? I mean, oftentimes there's a sense that you don't even want to know anything about the other person. But why did you want to meet her?
Frankly, I wanted to meet her because it could not remain a mystery to me for the rest of my life. Who was this woman who, after 18 years, could steal the affections of my husband? Right. I wanted to see what she looked like. And contrary to what a lot of therapists might believe, see that it can actually work out to be a positive situation. For me, meeting the other woman was quite healing. But you have to go with the right motives, that somehow that you can play this out in your mind as something that's going to be positive, at least for yourself, to bring healing and closure. And if you're expecting, the other woman to apologize, or if you just want to yell at her and tell her off and make a fool of yourself, which we usually do, well, in the long run, that's not going to make you feel better or solve anything.
So what was that moment like? I mean, how did she react meeting you?
For me, it was an extremely empowering moment. I perceived her to be nervous, which is understandable, and I think surprised. It was just a very odd moment. She invited me in for coffee. Really, people almost have to read the story in the book as to what actually happens in that moment, but I have to be the only woman in the world who would show up at the home of the woman who's planning to marry my husband with a little bag of teaching supplies on my side for the visual demonstration that I'm going to do to her to show her how leaving her husband and marrying my husband is not about to give her the happiness in her life that she's longing for.
Wow.
And I think I left an impact.
Yeah, I bet you did. How have your your children were at a pretty important age. I mean, old enough to really understand what's going on, but certainly the younger two, not necessarily having the emotional maturity to really appreciate it. How did they react? Do they feel anger at him, at your husband?
No, I mean, the two younger ones, like you say, they also have softer personalities, so they were It was really quite sad for my youngest daughter because when I was tucking her into bed one night, after he had told her, she said, "I wish we lived in the Bible times." And I was thinking, Bible times? Why would she be saying that? So I said, "Why?" And she said, "Oh, because then Dad could just have two wives." And you're just devastated because you're realizing the impact that these choices of adults are having on kids. But the oldest, who is 16, she had a very strong personality. She was not taking it lightly, and she was directing all of her anger in the same way that I was, which was towards the other woman. She actually called the other woman, which I'm sure was not a happy conversation, and the things that were said would not be appropriate for television.
Now, at what point did you realize he was not going to leave you?
That was really a long time. I mean, he came back, as I said, after the 2 weeks away, but it was hardly the homecoming that you would expect. Yeah. Like, you would think, okay, he's had an affair. Obviously, he should be on his knees begging for forgiveness with flowers. That's not the way it was. He asked to come home one night, and we talked for a while, and then I kind of went to bed, he went to bed, and we were both lying on the bed, fully clothed, looking at the ceiling, and I said, "What are you doing here?" And he goes, "I guess I'm home." And I'm thinking, what did I do in letting him in? Do I even want this man? So it was a roller coaster. It was up and down. And for myself, I would go through different phases where there would be times when I would think this isn't going to work. Even 6 months and a year later, I think this isn't going to work. There's no way I can forgive him. And then I would curse myself for not being better prepared to be financially secure and for the kids, if we got a divorce. And then I enrolled myself in university. I started, using our time together to launch my own degree at the time, and then I'd fall in love with him, and I went through that cycle quite a number of times during the 2 years towards healing. So.
We have to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll meet Anne's husband, Brian. He'll be here to share his side of his story.